Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Can you see my deck? And so. Did not know. Only testing the child out. Yes. Robert Lowe, we didn't understand. They didn't understand that. Or I send this exact material. Whether it's here or there, so. Oh, okay.
session regarding now.
Well, looks like you're unopposed today.
Yes, Your Honor, and it looks like my co-counsel's outside as well. I'm David Russell, Your Honor, on behalf of Veritas Laboratories LLC and Veritas North LLC. With me today is Brendan Shoemaker and also Kevin Blair, who's not in.
I met earlier, right?
at this moment.
Right. Well, can someone go grab the AGs?
Yes,
Thanks. Only been 2 or 3 weeks since I've seen you, Ms. Roberts. Yeah. It was very interesting. Did he tell you? You know what I thought? It was one of the alibi witnesses. He was so like nonchalant about, oh yeah, he was with me. And then when he said, I never went and told family members or anyone that he was with me, and while he knew his childhood buddy was out getting prosecuted for, it's like, who wouldn't do that? It's like it was unbelievable. Okay, well we'll have give them they can give you their card or their appearance or whatever you want to do. Oh, I have to grab something. I forgot.
This is Erica Moswell.
From a card. Up there.
We're gonna discuss it, perhaps both of us.
Yeah. You get there. you have to do it.
Well, they can just grab one from right over there.
Thank you very much.
Are we ready? All right, let me call the case. This is I don't know, is it Veritas? Is that how you're?
Yes, Your Honor.
Veritas versus Michigan Marijuana Regulatory Agency et al. Case number 21-000219. Why don't the plaintiff's counsel put their appearance on the record, please?
David Russell, on behalf of Veritas Laboratories LLC and Veritas North LLC. Your Honor.
Kevin Blair on behalf of both plaintiffs, Your Honor.
Thank you. And then for defendants?
Good afternoon, Judge.
All right, well, welcome to all 6 of you. And thank you for your briefs. They were all timely and helpful. Just a couple of preliminary things. One, is anyone out here in the gallery a potential witness?
Yes, Your Honor, Dr. Glenn is
Okay, well, she's gonna be the first witness, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. And then Nick is our IT guy who's helping us run the electronics part of this. Nick, can you hear me? Well, I don't know if you can. Usually they can when we're doing our Court of Appeals arguments.
I am currently hosting, and I can get messages to whomever we need to get
Is that
things settled.
Morgan?
That is correct.
Okay, Morgan, I just want, I said Nick because I saw him earlier, so I thought he was doing it. If you can shut off the audio, I don't know if that's possible to, the Zoom waiting room, because there may be some potential witnesses in there. I don't know if you're able to do that.
No, I don't believe we're able to do that.
Well, then why don't we have anyone, and I don't know if you want to list the names, but anyone who is waiting in the Zoom room as a potential witness, they just have to log off, and then, I don't know, can you text them when it's time for them to testify or something like that?
All right, could I make a suggestion that maybe you put it on the attorneys to make sure that all the potential witnesses are not watching? I understand it's on YouTube as well, so even if something's on.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, being live streamed. Yeah, that's fine. So can you both, or someone on each side, do that? Yeah, they can. That's why usually we put them during the trial, we put them in the courtroom, the other courtroom, right? But I don't know if we have do we have anyone else physically present that is going to be a potential witness? That's like waiting out in one of the conference rooms or anything?
Yes.
Okay. Well, or they can hear in the, the corridor out there, the hallway out there. We don't want them lingering and listening. So yeah, if you could do that, that'd be great. Okay.
We don't expect to call any other witnesses other than possibly for rebuttal. Do we need to tell our potential rebuttal witnesses not to be listening?
I would think so, just to be on the safe side. And then one final thing, I'm not wearing a mask, and two of plaintiff's counsel are not, and I'm fully vaccinated. I'm going to be more than 12 feet from anybody in this courtroom, and I can function much better this way. I've told counsel already that everybody on this side of the divider they can wear a mask if they want, or they can not wear one if they want, as long as they're fully vaccinated, because no one will really be within 6 feet, even if they're questioning the witness. But people in the gallery need to wear theirs the entire time, because they won't be talking at all. But those of us in here will be probably talking too much, and that includes myself. But I also indicated that if any witness comes in here and doesn't feel comfortable with anybody being unmasked, I will throw mine on. I've got it right here, and counsel will as well. So counsel, you're all satisfied with that protocol? Okay. And Ms. Roberts, you are as well? Yeah, so you're good with that? Yeah, I thought so from last time, but just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. Okay, well then with that, this is plaintiff's motion for preliminary injunction. I've read everything, obviously, done some of my own research, started crafting an opinion already. Plaintiffs, you can start presenting your case. No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon. I appreciate you making time to squeeze us in on such short notice. I want to start with a self-deprecating mea culpa, that there are plenty of typos in our brief. And we I'm one of those editors that I could spend a month on a brief, and if I had 10 more minutes, I would still be changing things.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for me in cases like this or an election case to where you barely have time to draft, let alone proofread. So it wasn't intentional, and I cringe at something that we see.
We all know how it goes.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the beast.
But, I was really surprised how much time and ink was spent in the response brief pointing out these typos rather than addressing the substance. Here we are asking this court for a TRO and a preliminary injunction to enjoin what we view as an ultra vires recall. And the defendants chose to focus on standing and some other things that we'll get into, but
But we're not going to get into standing. I mean, it's a no, that issue's going nowhere.
I'm glad to hear that because we didn't want to spend any time on that. But so, it was shocking that none of the substance was addressed. In particular, the in-depth analysis about all of the rules that require advance notice, except in extraordinary circumstances that would warrant a summary suspension. And Your Honor, you're familiar with some of these emails. This was by far a very frantic few days. Those emails, it was not an easy decision to explicitly encourage the MRA to use a summary suspension process, right? I mean, you don't do that lightly. Nobody wants to go through a summary suspension process, but it got so dire and things were so bad the last 2 weeks that we would have taken a summary suspension process in a heartbeat, because then at least there'd be some
So
oversight.
there's a process at that point. then.
Right, and we are confident that an ALJ would have found no basis for a recall or a summary suspension. And I suspect that defendants knew that too, because there was, a prominent case this summer where a processor had a summary suspension, and in the ALJ proceedings, the ALJ found that there wasn't a basis for that. And we don't know for sure, obviously, but we strongly suspect that the MRA was trying to avoid another embarrassing summary suspension like that. And so, you'll see there's 2 weeks where the emails where we're explicitly saying, you're not following your rules. We're entitled to notice. If this is such a health and safety issue, do a summary suspension, and we'll have an ALJ within 48 hours and we'll work through the process. And I think that's one of the key things that Dr. Glenn is going to testify today. We did submit her affidavit, which I'm sure has a couple typos in it as well. Probably my fault. But I want her to just kind of help elaborate and answer any questions on cross-examination. We're not hiding anything. That this is not a health and safety issue. And there's several instances in the defendant's brief where they suggest that this court shouldn't dare think about striking down an ultra vires recall or a de facto suspension, because everyone would be at risk and of health and safety dangers, right? And all of that is just kind of transparent scare tactics, because there's a lot that goes into getting a lab license in the first place. We'll get into all of that detail, accreditation and the proficiency tests and the validation and all of that. And they have to test dozens and dozens of samples, and they have to, they get these blind samples from a third party independent that know what's in the sample, but Veridus doesn't know what's in the sample. And if they don't come back with the exact result of what was in there and how much of it and whatnot, then they don't pass their proficiency testing. And they have to do that at the beginning part of accreditation, and then they have to do it again on a periodic basis, usually annual basis. And they went through all of that. And so the gist of what the MRA is saying without saying it out loud is it's almost like they're saying that Veridus knows how to do it when people are watching, but they're purposely manipulating tests when nobody's watching. And that, Your Honor, I would submit is a classic quintessential example of a time that a summary suspension would be appropriate. And the fact that they didn't do that, even after we expressly encouraged them to do that, shows that they were deliberately going outside of their own rules. All of the rules require advance notice, except the summary suspension, which requires due process immediately thereafter. And the recall itself, and then we're going to get into the day after the recall. The recall was horrible and caused irreparable damage, but the day after the recall, there was this unannounced de facto suspension where Viridis learned from its customers that it wasn't approved to do the tests that it had validated and accredited. And
But I get that, but assuming that's all true, the state in their response, as you saw, has said several times in their response brief that they have told your clients that they are fully able to engage in their full business. They're back to testing and all that. So whether there was a de facto summary suspension in the last 2 weeks of November, their position today, and I don't know when this was communicated, if it was at all to your client, that's no longer the case, that your clients are free to engage in all their business activities. Isn't that correct?
if I could address that in two parts, Your Honor. As of today, I believe that's correct. We were told very unclear way, and it took 3 or 4 days to get confirmation that they were saying we could retest. But this is not a moot issue. It could definitely happen again. And
I'm not saying it's moot, but we're talking about an injunction. We're
correct,
not talking about dismissing the case.
the injunction would be to enjoin them from deviating from their rules. There are rules in place on purpose for health and safety issues, and they deliberately avoided using any of those rules that would have entitled us to some due process. And that's our position. The day after the recall, again, we heard that we weren't able to do this test. And again, it's hard to understand how that wasn't deliberately intended to cause the maximum potential harm. That we were telling customers, yes, the MRA told us today that we're allowed to retest, and the MRA is telling our customers, no, you can't. And so that's creating more chaos and more confusion when in a situation that is almost impossible to imagine being worse after the recall. The Thursday morning after the recall was worse. And we spent all that day just trying to figure out what's the answer. And you'll see in the briefing, and there'll be testimony that at 4 o'clock that night, they said, here's a list of demands and
Right, I saw.
okay, so we'll get into that. But the point is that there is no health and safety issue. The state has observed these tests countless times. The Viridis has a license, and the rules specifically require certain procedures to follow if you're ever going to restrict that license or suspend it or do a recall. And they didn't follow any of those rules.
All right.
And I think I'll leave it there for.
Well, all right, then let me ask you a question, and this is also directed to Defense Counsel. I just want to make, some of these things are obvious, I think, but I want to get it clear for my purposes, some undisputed facts, okay? Do we agree that both labs are separate legal entities? They're both separate LLCs? Right? Okay.
Yes, Your Honor.
Do we agree that the standard operating procedures for testing at both facilities were approved by the MRA in July and August 2021? I mean, that's separately, not, one was in July and one was in August.
I know they were approved, Your Honor. I don't have the dates memorized, but assuming you're correct. on
Well,
the dates,
it was prior to the recall.
prior to the recall, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
We want that.
Okay. Do we all agree that these methods were also accredited by, I think it's A2LA, which is a national accreditation organization?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. And then the recall period was from August 10th to November 16th of this year. Yep.
Yes, Your Honor.
And it's on both labs. Okay. And it covered all products that are tested by both labs except certain inhalable products. Oh, it did, it got modified?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'll have to hear about that. When, do you know when the modification was? Well, it doesn't matter. Someone can let me know later on. All right, and then I think it's obvious that the administrative complaint that your clients filed was on October 25th, 2021 under the, I don't remember if it's the statute or the rule that allows licensees to do that for unnecessarily disrupting facility operations.
Yes, Your Honor, under the medical statute specifically, but yes, there's the statutory provision and a rule.
Okay, and then December 7th, there still is a, some kind of conference with the ALJ,
That is our first appearance with the ALJ.
and December 22nd is still the date for the contested hearing, I guess? Okay. Okay, that's it. Want to cover those two things.
Can I just clarify a couple things about that administrative complaint process?
Sure.
Okay, so I don't know whether this gets to the exhaustion of administrative remedies or what, but that really is a completely different process. There's one sentence in a statute that, you know, it apparently contemplates some sort of ombudsman procedure where you can file a complaint if you believe that the investigation procedures unnecessarily disrupt the business.
I don't think, I was just asking questions.
Okay,
It's not, I'm not, the exhaustion doctrine, I don't think applies when you're having constitutional challenges. I don't think ALJs can issue injunctive.
exactly. All right. That's where I was going with that. There's no way that that would move this.
No,
And-
but it could be a factor in certain parts of the four factors I have to look to and in deciding anyway, I just wanted to get this straight, the date's clear.
Okay. I think I'll stop there and
Okay,
so we have,
you want to call your first witness? Dr. Glenn?
Yes, Your Honor. Plaintiff's called Dr. Michelle Glenn.
All right, Dr. Glenn, come on up. How are you today? Good. Before you sit down, I'm going to swear you in, okay? Would you raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear and affirm that the testimony you will provide in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth will help you God? All right, have a seat. Okay, she will.
Name is Michelle Glenn. First name is Michele. Last name is Glinn.
Okay, if you could keep that microphone closer up, that'd be helpful. Thank you. And you're a doctor, right?
Yes,
Good afternoon, Dr. Glenn. Can you state your full name for the record again?
Michelle Glenn. Last name is Glinn.
Your Honor, may I approach? I have proposed exhibits.
Sure.
Dr. Glenn, can you look at the affidavit that I just handed you, which will be proposed exhibit 1, and tell me if you recognize that?
I do.
Okay, and how do you recognize that?
A copy of this was sent to me by yourself and Mr. Blair to review yesterday and again this morning.
And did you review that
I did.
affidavit? And
I
are
did.
the contents of that affidavit accurate?
Yes,
And are there 52 paragraphs in that affidavit?
there are 52.
Yeah. And you've reviewed all of those, correct?
I have.
Okay. And on the 11th page, is that your signature?
That is.
Okay. And I note below your signature that your signature wasn't notarized. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And my understanding is that you got in late last night and you weren't able to have this notarized. Is that right?
That's correct. I did
Okay.
not have access to a notary this morning.
Are you able to testify affirmatively to all the facts set forth in this affidavit,
I am.
that it's accurate
Yes,
and it's your personal knowledge?
yes.
Your Honor, I would like to offer this as exhibit 1 into evidence.
Objection?
Would note that. I have that. just like how it's- affidavit or see if there- or kind of a
Yeah, conclusory stuff. And some of it's argumentative, but Okay, well, I'll admit plaintiff's exhibit 1, and I'm obviously gonna ignore the some editorializing in the affidavit and.
Thank you, Your Honor. Otherwise, I could go through each,
Yeah, I know. and
which
it's-
I'm
you
assuming
know,
the court doesn't
If it was a
want.
jury, it'd be different, but I'm not concerned with what people's opinions are and things.
Okay,
Unless it's
understood.
factual based.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Glenn, are you currently employed?
Yes,
Okay, by whom?
I am the founder and chief science officer of Viridis Laboratories.
Okay. And Your Honor, I plan to qualify Dr. Glenn as an expert. So I'm going to go into her qualifications a little deeper than what I normally.
Okay.
Could you tell us about your academic background, where you went to college?
I have a PhD in biochemistry from Wayne State University that I obtained in 1993. I was a postdoctoral scientist at Eli Lilly, a pharmaceutical company in Indianapolis. I worked at the Indiana State Department of Toxicology. Sorry, yes. Um, At the Indiana State. I was a postdoctoral scientist at Eli Lilly, which is a pharmaceutical company in Indianapolis. From there, I went to the State Department of Toxicology in Indiana, where I helped to run the blood and breath testing program there. From there, I went to the Michigan State Police, where I ran the forensic toxicology program for 11 years. After that, I was moved to Southern Illinois, where I worked at a clinical toxicology laboratory called Essential Testing. That's now no longer in operation. And also a private forensic drug testing company called EverHealth, where I am still employed in addition to being working at Viridis. I am a board certified forensic toxicologist with the American Board of Forensic Toxicology, and I have a clinical laboratory director's license in the state of New York.
Do you have any teaching experience?
Yes, I have been a guest lecturer in forensic and clinical toxicology at a couple of schools in Indiana, Lindenwood University and Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. And I've also done a lot of training for court personnel, both here and in Illinois and Missouri, probation officers, attorneys, judges, sexual assault nurse examiners, and court reporters.
And
Court reporters.
And your first answer was a little bit quick for me to get all of it. So if this is redundant, I apologize. But do you have any experience in laboratory management?
Yes.
Okay, what is that?
I was in charge of the forensic toxicology program for the Michigan State Police for 11 years. So that was, I ran the laboratory and also test compliance with accreditation standards. We were accredited by a group called ASCLD Lab. I was the laboratory director of both Essential Testing and EverHealth, and I'm the laboratory director and chief science officer. I'm sorry.
And we
Can you
don't-
just
we-
slow down a
we-
little
and
bit?
We don't need a whole list. I mean, I don't think, I mean, I don't know. Are you challenging her extensive background in lab testing and the like? I wouldn't think so.
All right,
So
Your Honor.
I'll qualify her as an expert if you want.
Yeah, and lab safety compliance, Your Honor.
Any objection to that? All right.
Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. When was Viridis Laboratories and Viridis North founded?
2017, I believe, was when we incorporated the company. The laboratories themselves were opened later.
And who were Viridis Laboratories and Viridis North founded by?
Myself, Captain Greg Michaud, also formerly of the Forensic Science Division of the Michigan State Police, and Sergeant Todd Welch, also formerly of the Forensic Science Division.
And so are Viridis Laboratories and Viridis North two separate entities?
Yes,
Okay, and they hold two separate licenses?
yes.
Tell me a little bit about what the two Viridis Laboratories and Viridis North, what the intention was in forming the laboratories for Viridis North and Viridis Laboratories.
The intention was to provide a state-of-the-art safety compliance facility for the cannabis industry. It's a new industry. It needed laboratories. We, between the three of us, have very extensive laboratory and laboratory management experience. And so this was a new endeavor that we thought we could make a difference and help the safety of the citizens of Michigan.
What was required for the two laboratories to become licensed?
To become licensed, a lot of paperwork. The MRA had to come and, inspect it and approve us the facilities. There were building inspections. We also had to have all of our procedures validated and approved by MRA in order to start testing samples. They also require that within a year of operation, you have to be accredited by an outside agency, by ISO, which we, so there, you have a little bit of time to do that, but we did end up doing that as well.
Hey, can I ask a question? Do you mind?
No, go ahead.
You and the other two individuals you mentioned from the state police, are you the three are co-owners of both labs?
We are, there are other investors as well, but we have the majority share.
Okay, and the three of you, are you the ones who run the two labs?
Yes,
And between the two labs, I assume, so correct me if I'm wrong, that the employees are mostly separate. I mean, you have one, because one's in Lansing and one's in Bay City, right? So,
yes.
okay, is there any, I don't know, overlap or coverage where employees are kind of transferred between the two labs?
Not on a day-to-day basis, no. We do have like our IT people cover both laboratories. Our human resources department covers both laboratories, but day-to-day operations, they are separate.
And not the individuals who do the testing?
Correct, they're separate.
Okay, thank you.
You referenced the MRA a minute ago. You're talking about the Michigan Marijuana Regulatory Agency. Is that correct?
Yes.
When was your first interaction with the MRA?
My first interaction with them was probably sometime in the summer of 2019. At the time, I was again living in Indiana and Southern Illinois. I've lived in both states. And I just moved back here a year ago. So I was not on site every day. So there are other people who interacted with them before I was able to. But it was, I believe, like late summer of 2019. There was a site visit by a couple of people from MRA, and that's the first time I had met any of them. And that was before we had our license.
Okay, and since the time that you first met folks from the MRA till now, have you dealt with MRA on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, well, pretty much day to day, yes.
In your expert opinion, do these laboratory scientists that are employed by the MRA, do they have the requisite education and experience to govern marijuana testing laboratories?
My opinion on that is no. And the reason I say that is because it's admittedly a complicated job. They have to know the science. They have to know the individual tests that they're looking at. They also have to know how to assess compliance with standards, whether they're ISO standards or anything else. They also have to know the legal aspect of their job, what a regulator is supposed to do under the aegis of the state of Michigan. And I don't think some of those things are not things that you learn unless you're, someone is doing that job teaches you that. It's not something you go to school for. And I don't know that any of them have a lot of experience doing many of those things. I think most of them are probably not really familiar with how to assess compliance if you're an inspector, or how to work within the state's legal framework. And so I think some of the problems that we have had is just they don't know what they don't know, and they do things that really are outside of what they should be doing, and they may not realize it, but it does end up being
How many, I'm sorry, we finished?
almost.
Okay, sorry.
I would just say some of the frustrations maybe due to that.
Do you know how many, I guess I'll call them investigators, lab investigators there are that are employed by the MRA?
To my knowledge, there are 4. There is Allison Cheerio.
You need to tell me the names.
Okay.
4 of them?
3, and then a supervisor, so
You're
4.
familiar with all those individuals?
Yes.
Okay.
Would you tell us who the 4 investigators are? And if you know, could you tell us what their backgrounds are?
Allison Cheerio is, they call them lab science specialists, I believe, LSSs. Allison Cheerio is 1. Patrice Fields is 1. Nora Rosenzweig is 1. And then Claire Patterson is their supervisor. And those 4, to my understanding, make up the scientific enforcement section of MRA.
And as part of the rules that govern you, are there testing rules specifically that the 2 laboratories have to follow?
Yes,
And are you familiar with those rules?
yes,
Okay. And do those rules require that you have an accreditation?
yes.
Okay. And what is your accreditation again?
We are accredited by A2LA, which accredits us on behalf of ISO. so the International Standards Organization. So we are ISO 17025 accredited through A2LA.
Can you explain what that means to us non-scientists?
ISO is an international organization that sets standards for all kinds of industries. And you can have, they have, for want of a better word, contracting organizations that will go out and inspect laboratories or companies or whatever under the applicable standard, and will certify that that company is meeting those standards. So A2LA will say that we are meeting ISO standards.
And so does each lab actually have a certificate of accreditation from the A2LA under the ISO standard?
Yes, both laboratories do.
As part of that accreditation, were the two laboratories required to establish testing methods?
Yes,
Okay, and were you involved in that?
yes.
Okay, can you kind of walk us through how that works?
Well, the state has published what needs to be tested for cannabis. There's a list of pesticides and a list of metals and so forth. And so we developed methods to do all of those different types of tests that are required. And then we validated those methods. We sent our validation reports and data to MRA and they approved it. And then when it was time to be accredited, the A2LA inspector came and he looked at all of our methods and our validation, and he watched people do what they're doing, and then, issued his approval to accredit us.
And as part of that, our standard operating procedures, are those drafted as well?
Yes,
Okay, and so does the A2LA review those as well?
yes, they do.
After a lab's been accredited, what's the next step in the governance moving forward?
They do surveillance visits yearly. So they will come back again to just make sure you're still doing what you were doing when they were there the first time. And if there's any expansion, if you want them now to look at another part of the lab, a new method or something, you can have them come in addition and do that as well.
So,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I don't mean to.
no, you're,
A pain. But it's one thing to have methods that have been accredited. But we all know it's people who implement those.
Yes,
And we're human, we make mistakes. So you could have great accredited methods, but if your employee is not, I think I read somewhere about employees not using the right magnification, to really see the details of the plants or whatever they're looking at, the product, then, you're not, I don't mean your company, but any company is not doing what they need to do, even if they have the right accredited methods. Don't you agree with that?
correct. Yeah, I do. The answer to that would be that most accreditation organizations, including A2LA, requires QC monitoring or quality control monitoring. You can't just put a method up and call it good. You have to be doing continual review of your people and your processes, and you have to document that you are doing that review. And so we do.
How often are those reviews? Like, is this through that ISO organization?
ISO, ISO and A2LA for the purposes of this are basically the same. They come once a year, but they will ask for the documentation that you have been doing that. So we will do QC monitoring daily for every single batch of analysis that goes out. There are QC reviews, and that's documented. There are weekly reviews of other things in the lab logs and stuff like that, and that's all documented. So those are the sorts of things that your accreditor will ask you for and will want to see that you're doing before they will agree that you can be accredited.
And when you talk about these daily and weekly monitoring, is anyone in your corporations looking at these reports, or are these just like reports that are generated and they're sent to the accreditator once a year?
No, they're weekly, and we do have logs for all of these. Some things are daily with every analytical batch. That's a batch of pesticide data or a batch of potency data or what have you. Two people in fact review those, and that's all logged. And then some of the other equipment logs and stuff might be weekly.
Okay.
And we have all of those.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure again for the non-scientist that you mentioned validation. Can you explain what that is?
Validation is the process of showing that your method works. So you want to develop a new method. You have to show that it's specific, it picks up, the things it's looking for. It doesn't pick up things it's not looking for. It doesn't have, carryover or other instrument issues that's reliable, all of these things. So you do repeated certain types of experiments over days or weeks, and then you write all that up, and that is the validation. That's the report showing that it works.
And are you the person at the two laboratories that comes up with those validations?
I wrote them for the Lansing Laboratory, and Mike LaFramboy wrote some of them. He's the laboratory director for Bay City. He wrote some of them for Bay City, but it's the same format. I'm the one that developed that format.
And so you talked about methods. When you talk about methods, are you talking about the different types of testing that you're doing?
Yes,
Okay, and so does each method have a different type of testing?
yes.
Okay, and what all does each of these labs test for?
So we test for potency, which is the dose of the THC or the other cannabinoids in different sample types. And that is done by an instrument called an HPLC. We test for metal contamination, and that's done by an instrument called an ICP-MS. We test for pesticides. That's done on an instrument called an LC-MS-MS. We test for solvents and terpenes in certain types of samples, and that's done on an instrument called a GC-MS. And then we test for microbial contamination, which is done by PCR and by another instrument that looks for optical density. We also do water activity. So we're looking at how much moisture is in the samples. We have a little benchtop instrument that does that. And then we look for foreign matter, which we do under a microscope and a magnifying glass.
So I want to make sure that the court understands the process. You have to get accredited, and then what role does the MRA have in governing the two laboratories?
Well, they set the standards.
Well, let's stop there. When you say they set the standards, what do you mean by that?
They set all of the, first of all of the things they want tested for. They want samples tested for pesticides and metals and so forth. That was their, they set that standard.
And not to interrupt you again, but how do they do that? How do they tell you that that's what you have to test for?
I believe that was just all in the bulletins. I know there's an administrative rule that says there shall be an MRA and they shall, they shall set rules. And then they set out technical guidance and bulletins that they put on their website to say you will test for these things. And then they set what's called the action limits, or basically the fail limits, right? So if you have more than a certain amount of, nickel, your sample would fail for nickel, that sort of thing. So they set those thresholds as well. And those are all through the bulletins and the technical guidance at this point.
Okay, so
Has it, you see, at this point, has it always been that way?
It has, they are trying to, I think that they have some proposed administrative rules where they put all of those in that rule, but those rules are not in effect yet.
And I won't make assumptions. Do these levels that you're testing for change frequently, or is it pretty much the same? I mean, you've only been in existence since a couple of years.
Yeah, the action limits and the thresholds have not changed a lot. There are a few things that have changed, but it's not, they don't go undergo wholesale revision frequently.
what is a proficiency test?
A proficiency test is a test designed to test the lab's ability to do a test properly. So typically the way it's done is you would go to a company that provides them, and there are lots of outside vendors that make these, and you buy the test. They send you a sample and you don't know what's in it, but you would test it and see what results you got, and you report those results back to the proficiency test provider. So you would buy a microbial test, for example. They might send you 5 samples and they might all be negative, or the different ones would have different things in them, and you have to test them and report your findings back.
Are the labs required to do proficiency tests by the MRA?
Yes.
How do they direct you to do that?
Oh, that's also in the technical guidance that we need to have proficiency testing done from an outside third-party person, third-party company.
Why doesn't the MRA do that themselves?
Well, that would be a lot of, I would say a lot of work. That would be a big undertaking. You'd have to make enough proficiency test sample for everybody and send it out to them, and then tabulate all the results, and then do statistics on them. It could really be a couple of full-time jobs if they wanted to take that on. So since there are companies that you can buy them from, it's probably just easier to do it that way.
Does the MRA actually have a laboratory?
They do not.
So they wouldn't actually be able to do proficiency tests, is that right?
Not that kind of proficiency testing, no.
And so they require that you use a third party, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and what third party does Veritas use for proficiency test?
There are a couple. There's one called NSI and then another called Absolute Standards. We buy them from both of those companies, and either one depends on the test.
I want to ask you specifically about Aspergillus. Have the two labs had proficiency tests related to Aspergillus testing?
Yes,
Okay, when was the last time that the two laboratories did proficiency tests related to Aspergillus?
the last time they did it earlier this year. We got a new instrument platform, a new instrument, so it required a new method. And that was, I think, April. And that required us to do a proficiency test on that instrument, which we did for both laboratories, and we both passed. We did one proficiency test in hemp flour, one in an oil, which was meant to mimic a concentrate, and one in an edible, so that you're testing different types of samples, all for the same organism, so that you know that you can do all of those accurately.
So does that actually get sent to the MRA?
Yes, the MRA, the proficiency test provider sends us the results and MRA the results directly.
And what does the MRA do with those results?
And they keep those records, I'm assuming.
Do you ever see any of those proficiency tests show up in any of your approvals?
Initial approvals, yeah, they will usually list that we have done them.
Because it's a requirement of the MRA.
Yes,
And you talked about that you switched to a new platform for the testing of Aspergillus. Is that right?
yes.
Okay, what was the new platform that you switched to?
The platform that we switched to is made by a company called Biomir U. That's BIOMIEURX, I think. And it's an instrument for the Aspergillus instrument is called the GeneUp. That's GENEUP. We have another instrument that they also make that we use for other microbials. Prior to that, we had used an instrument called the ARIA that was made by Agilent. But that one, we switched to the Biomir U platform because MRA wanted us to use methods and instruments that had been approved by this other group called the AOAC. And AOAC had reviewed the Biomir U instruments, but they had not approved or reviewed the ARIA. So we did not use that anymore after that. So we had to switch to another platform, do more proficiency testing, and now that's the platform we use.
Do the two labs have SOPs for testing Aspergillus?
Yes,
And have those been approved by the MRA?
yes.
Okay, do you know when that was?
That was in late July and early August.
Of 2021?
Yes,
Okay, and that is on the BioMaru platform?
yes.
How was the SOP developed?
We took the manufacturer's instructions on how to do the test, and basically that's what we use. I mean, we formatted it in our formatting and
The manufacturer again was BioMaru, is that right?
correct.
And was the SOP validated?
Yes, all of this was validated. We had to, again, do all of those verification and validation experiments, write those all up, send those to the MRA, along with the SOP, along with the data, along with the proficiency test results. So they saw all of that, and then they issued their approvals.
And was the Aspergillus SOP, was that accredited by the HOLA?
Yes,
And you know, did the two laboratories receive method approval for Aspergillus from the MRA?
yes.
Okay, do you know when that was?
One was July 20th, I believe, and one was August 5th. It was in that timeframe, late July, early August.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
And Your Honor, I am trying to limit exhibits. I recognize we've attached a lot to the affidavit, but I just, ones of particular importance to this testimony, I'm going to try to introduce. So Dr. Glenn, can you look at what I've just hand it to you and tell me if you know what that is.
This is a method approval summary report from the MRA.
Okay, and what is a method approval summary report?
It's a form they send us. It just kind of lists all the things that you're currently approved for. And sometimes they come with a specific method number attached to them. And sometimes they just come with no number attached to them. So sometimes it's a little bit unclear what it refers to. But in all of them, there's a list of everything they have on record that you are approved to do.
Okay, and so are you familiar with this particular method approval report?
Yes.
And how is that?
I have a copy of this. And I believe in the original, this is a black and white copy. The approved is highlighted. And then it also says in the method approval, it talks about the aspergillus and the other microbials.
So is this an accurate depiction of the original method approval that you saw dated August 5th, 2021?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'd offer this into evidence as Exhibit 2.
Objection? All right, exhibit 2 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And so I want to get back to that real quick. I think you talked about the proficiency test results that were actually in the document. Can you tell me about that? What that means? I think you're starting on page 7. Is that correct?
Yes. So in this one, they have the proficiency test results that they were sent by the provider directly to them. And they look like they had, copied and pasted it into this document so that you can see the actual proficiency test results. Starting on page 7, there are results for 3 different samples for each of the different types of microorganisms. And you can see that it says evaluation is acceptable for all of them.
What specific is tested for by these proficiency tests?
On page 7, we were testing for certain types of E. coli in 3 different sample types: in hemp, in edibles, and in oil, which is a concentrate. On page 8, we were testing for salmonella in hemp and in edibles. And then also in oil, that appears on page 9. On page 9, you also see aspergillus in mold in hemp. Now aspergillus, there's different types of strains of aspergillus. So we were looking for a couple of different kinds. So we look for total mold and then a specific kind of aspergillus called fumigatus. So those are acceptable. Then you can see the other kinds of aspergillus on the top of page 10. Again, those are all acceptable. Then you see the same sort of results below that in edibles. And that continues into page 11. Where you see it in oil, and I think they were only looking for the total in oil.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
And I apologize for this if I'm wrong. Your motion indicates that you have 2 challenges to the recall, right? It's included Bay City when nothing from Bay City was tested. And then the other aspect of it, I thought, was it was too overbroad in that it covered things that weren't being tested for this aspergillus, is that how you pronounce it? And other microbials.
Mhm.
I thought that's what you said in your motion.
Well, in our,
I know you said that.
well, in our motion, Your Honor, we did offer to the court that those 2 are absolutely unrelated. And to the extent that the court's not willing to issue a full preliminary injunction as to the full recall, that it certainly should enter an injunction as to the fact that Veritas Bay City and the 10% that had nothing to do with any of these microbial absolutely should have nothing to do with it. That's at a bare minimum. But no, we are asking for the full recall to be enjoined. I think we show that the fact that we meet all the elements on all the issues, but
I get what you're trying to do. I just was looking at my notes and it reminded me that I thought this was a little bit more narrowly tailored, but maybe I was wrong. So go ahead.
Well, we do mention that in our brief. You're correct, Your Honor. But if you look at the proposed order, it's for the entire recall, and we believe that.
I didn't look at the proposed order. 'Cause
Okay.
I write the orders, not the lawyers.
Right.
But so I was looking at your motion because that's what you're moving me for, right? And I thought you had said that, but I'll double check. I could be wrong. Wouldn't be the first time.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Dr. Glenn, the proficiency report is in the method approval report. So as of August 5th, you were approved to test aspergillus with the biomaru method. Is that right?
Yes,
Are you currently testing aspergillus in the same manner you were at the time that these proficiency tests were taken?
yes.
Is there anything that's changed in your testing of the aspergillus since the time the proficiency test was taken?
The testing method, no.
Can you describe the steps that the MRA has taken that brought us here today, starting with an October 25th email to your competitors about a potential, or not a potential, seeking an investigation and a retest?
Yes, they sent out emails to us and to 5 other laboratories that we were to give samples, all of the remained in our inventory, to these different labs. So we had 2 samples going to each lab, and that would be 5 different laboratories. The labs were directed to come to make arrangements to come to Viridis and pick up everything we have left and give it to them. And they were to test those samples for potency and for aspergillus. The labs are also directed to go to the growers or the processors and pick up another sample, a new sample from them, and test that as well. So we did make all those arrangements for it. There were a couple emails back and forth from different labs asking, questions about logistics and details. And in one of those, it was mentioned, this is an investigation. So obviously it's going to be either us or the grower that's being investigated, but I think most of the people that seem to conclude it was us.
And so were these tests from Viridis Laboratories in Lansing?
Yes.
Okay. And were they retests?
Yeah, they were samples we were done with, but we are required to maintain samples for 30 days on our inventory. So they were ones we had tested, reported out, but we still had them on site because we hadn't disposed of them yet. That's what they were. So they came and we gave them everything we had left. And then the labs took them and did their own tests on them.
In your expert opinion, did you think it was an appropriate method of retesting those retests from Viridis Laboratories to send those to other laboratories?
Well, the problem is it's not the same sample. We go out and we collect a sample as aseptically as possible. We bring it back, we take a portion of it and test it for microbials, and then we take the rest of it and we homogenize it, grind it up, and then we do our other tests with it. But once you've been touching the sample and you've been, handling it, it's not pristine anymore. So when you take the sample that's been handled and you send it out and they test it for microbials again, you may well get different results. And
Can I ask, I'm sorry, I interrupt you again. And I shouldn't, you're not a lawyer, so, that was a joke. No surprise, I'm not familiar with the marijuana industry. So the basics is someone grows the plants. They then take a portion of those plants and send them to you, right? Or no?
we have to come and get them.
Okay, you come and get them, but you get a portion of their plants before they're turned into all the myriad of products that are now out there with marijuana, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so then you look at what you testified to for all these different things that would be bad to have in the plants. You give it the AOK, and then you give the okay to the grower, and then the grower does whatever they do with those plants because they've been given the AOK.
Yes, there are a couple more steps in addition to that. We give the certificate of analysis to the grower, but we also have to upload the test to the state's database, which is called Metric. And until those results are in Metric, the growers can't do anything. They're not allowed to sell them. And that's actually something else that I don't know that we've mentioned it, but the MRA can then lock up stuff in Metric. They can put holes on them and then the growers can't do anything with them. But if they're all approved, the growers can then take those plants, they can make extracts out of them. They can make other products out of them. Those products also have to be tested. So, we'll come back and see them in another form, often, and then they can be sold.
Thank you.
And I want to make sure that we're clear on this point. Is it your opinion, your expert opinion, that that's a proper method to determine whether Veritas Laboratories of Veritas North, in this case, just Veritas Laboratories, had properly tested these methods by sending them out to these other laboratories?
No, because if you're having to retest something that required a pristine sample and the sample is no longer pristine, you're going to get different results. And that's not because there was anything wrong with what we did or anything wrong with what the other lab did. They're really not in the same condition. In addition to that, you also have to make sure that the labs are using the same types of methods, because if somebody has a method that has one level of sensitivity and another lab's using a method with a different level, you might get different results there. And again, that's not anything anyone did improperly, that's just the limitations of the method. So I don't really know what the other labs are doing, but I know that's something that needs to be taken into account. And in addition to that, my understanding is there were 10 samples sent out and 4 of them agreed with ours and 6 of them did not. And that's a very small sample size, plus you have the difference in conditions of the sample. You can't really draw any firm conclusions based on that.
Does the MRA have any technical guidance on how a sample should be retested?
Yes,
And would that comply how they retested your sample? Would that comply with that?
no, typically the retest is when a sample fails for something, whether it's nickel or microbials or whatever. And then the grower can remediate it, and which means fix it. And how they do that depends on what it failed for. But once they've have it remediated, they can have it retested again. They have to let MRA know they did this. And then we have to send out our technicians to get a new sample, and then you would test a new sample. You wouldn't retest a sample you've already tested.
Is it possible for a lab to test for aspergillus and get a positive result because one bud of the sample had aspergillus, and then another lab to test the same sample and find that another bud didn't?
Yes.
Can you explain why that's a fact?
So when you're collecting, they're plants, so there'll be multiple buds on a stalk or multiple flowers, and the yeast or mold or aspergillus is not like evenly coating the plant. It might be growing on this one bud. It might not be growing on this one bud. So think of like if you have a carton of strawberries from Walmart and some of them are fuzzy and some of them aren't. It's same sort of thing. So if you collect a bud that has the yeast and mold on it, you may find it if that's the one you picked, but the one next to it may not.
So in your expert opinion, these were not appropriate retests?
No.
You recall the MRA coming on site to Veritas Lansing and Veritas Bay City on October 26th and 27th?
Yes.
What was the purpose of the on-site visit?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you. They're supposed to do an on-site visit.
Not sure why she answering.
Yeah.
Okay.
What did the MRA do when they came out? Were you present?
I was there.
Okay. And what was it they did?
They did more or less the type of routine audit they do. We sat in the conference room and we looked at methods and documents, and then they went out to the lab floor and watched different people do things and asked questions of the staff.
Did the MRA raise any issues after the audit?
After the second audit, after the Bay City, which was on the second day.
Was one of the issues that was raised something to do with logs?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the issue that the MRA raised?
They asked if we had incubation time logs for aspergillus. So what that means is they were asking if you put them in, do you write down what time you have to incubate them actually for a certain amount of time? Do you write down what time you put them in and what time you put them out, take them out? And we said no, because that is not something that was ever required or asked for. And they said that that was an issue.
Does your SOP require that Veritas Laboratories or Veritas North have logs?
Our temperature logs, we are required to have temperature logs for all temperature sensitive equipment, which includes incubators. So we are writing down the temperatures of the incubators daily. That's also an accreditation requirement, and we do monitor that. There was never any suggestion by A2LA or MRA in the past that we should write down the times of the incubation too. And all microbial assays require incubation for some period. You have to let the microbes grow on your sample, and then, or you let your sample grow and then test it. So it's not something that's specific to aspergillus, but they've never been asked for. It's never been written in any technical guidance or SOP. So it was just not something we had done. I mean, we could do it and we are doing it now, but the reason we didn't do it before is it was just not a requirement.
Do you think by not having logs that produces unreliable results?
No, if you were not doing the assay right, you would have unreliable results, but not writing down something. If it's not a requirement that you write it down is not the same thing.
And when you say assay, what do you mean by that?
Assay test,
The method that you do it?
yes,
And you were accredited in that method, is that correct?
yes.
Do you recall receiving some audit results from the MRA after
Yeah.
that onsite?
Yes,
Was it November 15th?
that sounds right.
And the day that you received those audit results, did you have a phone call with the MRA?
Was that day? Yeah, we had several phone calls with the MRA.
And what was it that the MRA wanted to discuss?
Well, they were at that point also locking up our samples in metric, which is the state's database, which basically means the growers couldn't do anything with them. So that was causing a lot of angst with our customers. And we wanted to know why. And then they told us this recall was coming and that we had all of these findings on this audit that we had to fix. And that was also a little odd because usually lab audits are not all that unusual. You have to have them a couple times a year. And typically they come back with, nobody ever says your lab's perfect, right? They always come back and say, well, maybe you need to do this a little better or that a little better. And typically these are not major things and you have a certain amount of time to address those. But we weren't given any time. We were told you have to do this right now or we're gonna, not let you test anymore.
Were you given a reason why the MRA was proposing a recall?
The lack of the incubator time logs, not the temperature logs, but the time logs and the retest by the other laboratories.
You're talking about the 10 tests that we discussed earlier, is that correct?
Yes.
What was this given to you in writing?
There's a series of email exchanges, but I don't think anybody ever wrote down the recall. We're doing this is for these reasons. It was all conversation and we have some emails that says that.
Sorry, Your Honor, we're scrambling to get exhibits together.
Is there a document, not email exchanges, but a document that was sent to the plaintiffs indicating the reasons for the recall? I saw that. Okay.
Do you know if you had, when I say you, I'm talking Veritas North and Veritas Laboratories, had any experts that weighed in on this issue of the retest and the complaint of lack of logs on November 15th?
Yes, we did.
Okay. And who were those people?
One was a gentleman named Patrick Bird, and he is with the AOAC. AOAC is that outside consulting agency that MRA requires to have. They require us to use only methods that have been approved or reviewed by this agency, and they do speak to him for advice or consultations frequently. So he sent an email. I was on that email string as well to Desmond Mitchell of Lara, and where we discussed this, and he said in his opinion, it was not.
We're looking for the email so that she can testify to that. And that's what
Well, she still can't testify to what this other gentleman said. if
she
it's
can
going to the truth of the
testify,
matter.
Your Honor, to that she received the email, what she believed it to mean.
Right. She can testify that she received an email.
Yes, I did.
Right, it's not for the truth of the matter asserted, it's for the effect on the recipient,
For her actions afterwards.
for the MRA's actions afterwards, yes.
Well, is there objection to that? I mean, if it's not,
Ron, I guess I would like to know what was that. What they did,
well,
Well,
we'll.
Your Honor, they issued a $229 million recall.
First of all, well, all right. Let's relax. First of all, do you have the emails that you were looking for?
Your Honor, apparently I only have one copy of this right now. Is it all right if I hand this to the witness to?
Is there, I assume you're familiar with this email or no? I mean, they're probably one of the million that were attached to these briefs.
yes, I mean, we have all the emails.
Was Exhibit I to the complaint, Your Honor.
Okay, do you have that?
Pleasure right now.
Let's wait till they have their copy in front of them before you start having the witness testify off of it.
Yeah, approach it with a chair.
Sure.
Dr. Glenn,
Wait, hold on a second. Counsel, do you have this
yes.
November 17th email? Okay, good.
Dr. Glenn, can you tell me what I just handed? Have you seen that before?
This is an email from Pat Bird to Desmond Mitchell, Mr. Blair, Mr. Russell, and a bunch of other recipients, Julie Kleitman, Claire Patterson, Risa Scully, Mark Fisk, myself, and Greg Mashad, my partner. And this was Pat's addressed some of the questions here that we are talking about today.
And you stated that you received this email. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what did you understand this email to mean when you received it?
He was weighing in on whether the retest supported the recall and whether some of the other things in the audit were sufficient to support a recall.
In your opinion, does Mr. Bird have the expertise to make a determination on those two items? Fair enough. Do you know Mr. Bird?
I know of him. I've spoken with him. I've never met him in person.
Do you know what it is that Mr. Bird does?
He is a consultant with,
You know, I'll tell you one thing, since I'm going to be the one deciding this, I don't. He could be as intelligent as your client. If he's not here and I don't get to see what he's like, I'm not going to take a whole lot of credence in what Mr. Bird has to say, because it's probably similar to what she's already testified to. So, just-
Understood, Your Honor.
Just to not waste our time.
Okay, yep, I'll move on, Your Honor. Understood. Did you have a series of emails back and forth with the MRA between November 15th and November 17th?
yes,
Did you during those conversations back and forth, those email conversations back and forth, discuss the reasons for the proposed recall?
yes,
Okay. And were you part of any discussions as to why the recall was inappropriate?
yes,
When were you on calls with folks from the MRA regarding the recall?
Yes,
And notwithstanding those conversations, the recall is still issued on November 17th, correct?
that's correct.
How did the November 17th recall affect Veritas Laboratories and Veritas North?
It was devastating. We were found out from our customers again that we weren't allowed to do any microbial retests. All of our customers had to have their samples retested. They were very confused about how they were supposed to do this. They were calling us, they were calling MRA, they'd call us back. They all canceled their collections, so we had no samples coming in. And then we ended up packaging a lot of them as samples at the customer's request and sending them to other laboratories to be retested so the customers could sell them.
Do you think that the recall affected your goodwill with your customers?
Definitely, they're very upset.
And did you lose any customers?
Probably. I mean, I think right now they're all still trying to figure out what they're going to do. They canceled all the collections, so whether they come back or not, we don't know at this point.
Describe what happened
Wait,
post.
can I ask? I'm
Sure,
sorry.
yeah.
When you say they canceled their collections, these were collections that were already scheduled,
Yes,
and then this recall comes out on 17th.
Yeah.
And there's confusion for obvious reasons. And now we are, I think 2 weeks or almost 2 weeks from then. Well, let me ask this question before I ask them. Has the state contacted you or the other two owners to indicate that the agency no longer has any objection to the two labs fully operating?
they have emailed us that. I don't know if but our customers are hearing something different from them. And then the other part of this is that samples in the state's database are still locked up and they can't sell them. So even if you're told, yeah, you can go ahead and test, and we test and we upload the results to the database, if MRA holds them up there, the customers can't do anything.
I mean, I would understand them doing that for the samples or whatever that were in the recall period, but if it's your opinion or your understanding that if you started, and hopefully you are, but if you started testing right now or going to collect samples to test and you tested them and then you uploaded the results to this, computer system, it would be still on hold?
I don't know,
Okay.
because they locked up not just the samples that they said that they were recalling for, they locked up samples that were not tested for microbials. They locked up samples that were not flower samples. And when the customers called to, ask why, I don't know if we got a clear answer. I think later they went back and removed some of those, but initially that was a big mess. So I don't really know what they would do, to be honest with you. We have not started retesting samples. We don't, I think they went and collected some yesterday, so we wouldn't even have any results to upload for several days yet. So I don't know the answer to that.
When you say that they locked them up, what do you mean by that?
They put an administrative hold on them in the database. And this database is administered by another company. It's outside the state of Michigan. A lot of states use it. So the customers can't sell that product because it's got a hold on it. So that's how they know it's not allowed to be sold.
And what's the name of that third-party vendor?
The database is called Metric, METRC. It's something like marijuana enforcement and tracking, something. I'm not sure what the name of the vendor is. I would have to look that up for you.
Can you explain the process, how it works? After you test the sample, is it then sent to Metric?
Yeah, after we test the sample and we generate the results, we have like an in-house database of all our samples, and we upload it to that in-house database. That database generates an input file to Metric, and we upload those to Metric. Metric is how the state tracks what's sold and the results of everything. So they track everything through that database, and we are required within 3 days of completing our testing to upload those results so that they have them.
Here, let me ask you this question. From an outside objective observer, I mean, we all hear about recalls for meat products, all across the US. You hear about them not infrequently from some of the major producers of goods. And, so this is what happened to your companies for a 3-month, I think basically 3-month time period. Now the state says, hey, everything's fixed and your processes are great. And I know you may dispute that, but this is what my understanding is. And you can move forward with your business operations, okay? It's, I guess somewhat speculative, but it's hard to accept that if it's true that your organizations have 60 to 70% of the market, and clearly 3 people coming from the state police, that's probably a big reason why, with your credibility, that a recall, an isolated recall like that would significantly impair your business operations going forward. Can you address? I mean, it's sort of speculative to me, for me to ask that, but that's an injunction is what you want me to do to stop this. So, and I'm,
Well, I guess there'd be a couple of things I would say in response to that. First of all, it does hurt our credibility immensely because they're basically saying that nothing that we did could be relied on, and the evidence they're using for that is extremely specious. It's something that would be a minor finding in an audit. It's not something to disrupt the business like that. Secondly, it does, a lot of our customers will lose their goodwill because they get the feeling that, how do we know this is going to happen again? They're not going to do this again to you guys. And so they're leery about dealing with us. A lot of them have lost a lot of money and they're angry. So they might not want to deal with us for that reason. They perceive this as our fault. So it was, if it was like one small, product or something, or one very narrow, maybe that would have been true. But I think the scope of this just did irreparable damage to our company.
okay, thank you.
Have you ever seen a rule or statute that tells Veritas Laboratories or Veritas North what actually triggers a recall?
A statute, I am not aware of a statute.
Have you seen a rule?
It's not in the administrative rules governing marijuana, to my knowledge.
Yeah, but you testified about these bulletins and technical guidance and one other document that you received that sets forth the levels that are impermissible, right?
Yes, correct.
So you know what they're looking for with respect to what is good product and what is bad product.
Yes.
Okay.
Have you ever seen a procedure from the MRA on what they do, guidelines for issuing a recall?
No, that's correct. I mean, they do have the action limits as the court showed us, but they don't, how they do a recall or what the threshold is for a recall, I don't know. I know they have, there are other labs that have been disciplined for things and recalls weren't issued. So it seems very, I don't want to say subjective, but it's not well defined what would do that. And then the other thing is, there was no evidence there was anything wrong with any of these samples. To my mind, no real reliable evidence. The lack of a log is not evidence. So I don't know what threshold they were using for this.
And you delineated 2 specific things that, at least as of November 15th, they give you as justification for the recall, which was the log issue and these 10 retests. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. Based on those 2 justifications, are you aware of any rule or statute that Veritas Laboratories or Veritas North was in violation of?
I am not.
Any technical guidance that Veritas was?
No.
No. It's my last one, Your Honor.
What are we gonna do with 3?
Oh, I'm sorry. I would move to admit that into evidence, Your Honor. I believe she left. I believe she laid a proper foundation. She received that email. She knew what it was, and she testified or started to testify to what her understanding of what it was or what it meant was.
Yeah, I mean, there's been your offer of proof in a way was, it was gonna show that what the state did in response to this. And I haven't heard that yet, I don't think, unless I missed it.
Well, she tested about the recall, I guess not specific to that email, Your Honor.
Well, this is after, this email's at 3:02, what, on November 17th, when was the recall issued?
I think about 4 o'clock.
So it's prior to that.
Yes.
All right, well, I'll just admit it for non-hearsay purposes.
Yeah, I guess, Your Honor, I want to confirm too that we've entered exhibit number 2.
Yeah, we did. I admitted that, and one.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
Dr. Glenn, I'm showing you what's been marked as proposed exhibit 4. Can you take a look at that and tell me if you've seen that before?
Yes,
Okay, and what is that?
this is an email string between Mr. Blair and Desmond Mitchell from Lara about whether Viridis can test or retest back and forth. So there were a number of emails in this string.
And were you on this email chain?
Yes,
Do you recall receiving this email?
I do.
This is an accurate depiction of the email you received?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would offer this as exhibit 4 into evidence.
Exhibit 4 is admitted.
Can you read the first sentence of exhibit 4 on the first page there?
The first sentence of the email,
Yes.
it says, Kevin, we need the information before we can resolve the testing issue and allow Viridis to resume these tests. The sooner we get it, the sooner that can happen. I recommend we let Michelle and Claire work on this together. Also, the reason she is sending everything at one time is so we can keep track of it and avoid any confusion.
What did you understand that to mean when you received that email?
This is when so again, this was in response to this audit, and typically audit findings, you have 30 days to remediate, and we were trying to get them everything right away so that they can let us start testing again. So we were proposing to send them, answers to their queries piece by piece, but they wanted it all at one time.
So what was the date of that top email that you just read?
The date of this one was Tuesday, November 23rd at 5:37 a.m.
And what was your understanding of Viridis Laboratories and Viridis Norris ability to test on November 23rd?
Well, as far as I was aware, we were not able to test for microbials. So we could test for other things, but not microbials. So most of the samples require microbial testing. So if we couldn't do that, we could not do the vast majority of our business.
What was the reason that was given, or that you understood to be the reason that Viridis North and Viridis Laboratories was unable to test microbial at that time?
My understanding is that because they did this audit on the 26th and 27th, that we didn't have the logs and we had these 10 other retests. That's why we couldn't test for microbials, and they wanted those audit findings fixed. So we instituted the log sheet that they wanted. And then they also had other things listed in there that had nothing to do with microbials, but they wanted all of that as well before they would let us retest.
Your limitation to testing for microbials is because of the first sentence in exhibit 4, where it says, we need the information before we can resolve this testing issue. The testing issue is what you thought was microbials?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
On November 17th, the date of the recall, do you remember what time that was approximately that you learned of the recall was actually issued?
The recall was issued late in the afternoon. I want to say 4:30, 5 o'clock, something like that, because we were back and forth with Laura most of the day, and it came out at the end of the day.
Were you ever told on November 17th, prior to the recall being issued, that Viridis Laboratories or Viridis North would not be able to test microbials going forward?
I don't recall that that was what we had found the day before, actually. And I think it might have even started on the 16th with that all of our samples in metric that were being put on hold, like everything we had ever tested. So we had an inkling that they were doing this, but it was not an official communication from them saying that.
You didn't, on the 17th, you didn't have an express statement to one of the two entities that they weren't able to test microbial.
Correct.
On November 18th, was it your understanding that when you opened up for business, that the two entities would be able to test for microbial?
On the 18th, the day after the recall,
Yes.
I'm trying to think of the timeline here because it was very, very muddled. I don't think we ever got an official, you can't do this anymore. It was just more like all the samples are suddenly on hold. And then we have customers calling us saying they were told this. And then we were trying to communicate to Lara and to MRA and find out the answer. And depending on who you asked, we got kind of different responses. So it was pretty quick to figure it out. But I don't think we ever got a reply from them saying you cannot test for microbials.
Did you think the MRA was clear in their communications to you and what you could or couldn't do with your license?
No, they weren't. And also, and it's not just to us. I know our customers were sending us emails. They got different directions depending on who they talked to. So it was not clear at all.
You testified that on the 18th, you heard from customers. What do you mean by that?
We'd have customers emailing us saying things like, our samples are locked up in metric. What's going on? I called MRA. They told me I had to have them retested. They said, you guys can't do it. What should we do? Emails like that.
So you learned from your customers as opposed to the MRA.
Yes.
Do you recall if you had any Teams meetings or Zoom meetings with the MRA on the 18th?
We had several. I'm not sure the exact dates. I would have to go back and look, but we did have Teams meetings before the recall.
Did you have any after the recall?
Yeah, I think we had one, I think it was on Teams, where we were talking about what we needed to do to get back up and going again. And basically all these audit findings is what they told us we needed. They wanted answers to all of that.
Had the MRA provided you a list of things that the labs had to accomplish in order to begin testing?
They did, yes. They sent us one list and then we started to work on that and then they sent us a longer list. So we spent a good part of the following weekend, that would have been the weekend after November 18th, getting all those things together for them. And some of those things were not easy to do. They wanted, for example, 3 months worth of instrument data, which is something that they had not asked for before, which we could do, but it was not something on the drop of a hat we could do. We wanted to address all their concerns quickly so we could get back to business, but a lot of the things they asked for went beyond the log issue, but also were not things that were easy to do in a short period of time.
I think you indicated you had two lists. You had a shorter list and then a longer list. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. Were the two different requests different in nature?
yes. One was a bullet point list from Julie Kleitman, who said, these are the things, but there may be more details coming. And so we started to work on those things. And then the second list came from Claire Patterson, and it was much longer and had a lot of things in it that weren't in Julie's list. So we were a little blindsided by that, but we spent the rest of the weekend trying to get that for them.
Does Viridis Laboratories and Viridis North still have product in its labs from the recall that's required to be tested?
Yes, we should. Anything within the last 30 days, we would still have on site unless we sent it to another lab.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Dr. Glenn, need any water or need a break or anything like that?
Water would be good. I don't need a break though. Thank you.
Okay, well, maybe we can get somebody to get her a water. Yeah. I don't have water up here. I'd give it to you. Oh, yeah. You have water over there? Pre-COVID, we had lots of water around here. I don't know why we don't anymore, but anyway. So are you ready to, they'll get you some water. Are you ready to have some cross-examination so we can keep moving?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Good afternoon, Dr. Glenn.
Good afternoon.
Are you the lab director for each lab?
I'm the lab director for the Lansing Lab.
And how would you describe your role for the Bay Lab?
I'm the chief science officer.
The first or second, I asked her if she was the lab director for each labs. And then, okay. I asked her what her role was at the Bay Lab.
I'm the chief science officer for the company, so I consult with and basically oversee the lab director for the Bay City Laboratory.
And who's the lab director for Bay?
Michael Laframboise, last name is spelled Laframboise.
And the MRA conducted on-site audits October 26th and 27th of this year,
That's correct.
one at Bay and one in Lansing.
That's correct.
And were you present for each of those
Yes.
audits? And why were you present for both?
Because I'm the chief science officer and one of the owners, so I was present for both. Thank you.
And you, Mr. Mashad and Mr. Welch are the co-owners of each lab.
That's correct.
Earlier, you talked about the several different types of testing that's conducted at Viridis Labs, correct?
Yes,
You might have talked about 7 or 8 approximately, or
yes,
if you know exactly.
that sounds about right.
Okay, one of which is microbial contamination.
Yes.
And why is that test conducted on marijuana samples?
To ensure that they are free from microbials. That's a standard test to be done like in the food and beverage industry and dairy industry. Make sure that there's not, contamination with microbes for anything that's being consumed by humans.
Is aspergillus a microbial?
Yes,
And if aspergillus is consumed by a human, does it present risks?
it depends very much. First of all, it depends on the species of aspergillus, and it depends on whether it's consumed or inhaled. Consumption, probably not so much. Inhalation, it could be an issue if you have an immunocompromised condition. So it's not like, deadly to everybody, but there might be people who might be susceptible to it.
Is aspergillus a fungus?
Yes.
And how prevalent is it in marijuana?
How prevalent? I'm not sure I could answer like the exact percentage of prevalence. I mean, it's present in the environment in general. It would be present in marijuana samples. It could also be present in other foodstuffs. Could give you like a percentage.
Is it fair to say that it's one of the most riskiest microbials that can be in a marijuana product?
I don't know that that's true. I don't really. I think it would depend on the species of aspergillus you're talking about. Again, there are multiple ones, so some of them are riskier than others. If it's the riskiest, I couldn't tell you.
What are some other common microbials?
There are all kinds of different sort of yeast and mold, like Candida albicans. There's different coliform. One is called Candida albicans. That's albicans. There's different types of bacteria that we test for, such as Salmonella, and different types of E. coli.
And Viridis Labs maintains a website, correct?
Yes,
And it outlines the different testing that is provided,
that's correct.
and including microbial analysis.
Yes,
And on that particular website, is aspergillus specifically listed as something that Viridis Labs tests for?
I believe it is. To be honest with you, I don't really look at the website much because I don't like looking at myself. So I am not. I'm sure it is because it's common to list what you test for, but
And to the best of your recollection, On that particular, in that particular section where it talks about microbial analysis, is aspergillus the only microbial mentioned
In which section?
of the service of microbial analysis?
On our website?
To testify that, I guess you can see if she's, if it refreshes her recollections. I know you don't have a document, but the question itself. Sure.
So you, a printout of the microbial.
It doesn't actually refresh my recollection because I haven't looked at it. But if this is from our website, I will agree with you. This looks like this first page here is just MRA's action limits for these. So this is probably taken from their website. I did not design the website. So again, I'm not really all that clear what's on it, but
Um, when was it that you first learned that the MRA was comfortable that Viridis was in compliance with its testing procedures and could resume or carry out the microbial testing?
that would have been a couple of days ago, I think, when we got an email from your office because we had gotten conflicting answers from MRA before that.
I'm sorry, that was an email about what?
From the MRA that they could carry out microbial testing in accordance with their procedures.
Okay, you got that a couple days ago?
Yes. So today,
So today's Wednesday, maybe Monday?
I believe it might have even been over the weekend. I believe it was back and forth again, emails trying to, because we did get conflicting answers and the answers we were getting from them was conflicting with what our customers were telling them. So we were looking for clarification. And it was an email from your office, I believe, saying, yes, you're good to go. And I would have to refresh my recollection as for the time of that, but it was either late Friday or over the weekend or early Monday.
So you knew it before you started business this week?
Yes, I believe that's correct. Yes.
And last Wednesday, is that November?
The day before Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving, were you notified through Claire Patterson that the MRA was comfortable with that? Viridis was testing in compliance with this procedure and could carry out the microbial testing?
Last Wednesday. Yes, I think it was after hours though. I think it was like 8 o'clock at night, Wednesday night. I think there was something that came from her by then, and then we were closed, Thursday and Friday.
And I understand that, but to be fair, this past week and all throughout the weekend, there was communications between Viridis and the MRA and your attorneys and AG's office, correct?
Yes, there were a lot of emails. But again, it was confusing because what our customers were hearing was apparently not what we were hearing. So
Okay, but you understand as of now, and at least as of Monday, started this work week, you could carry out your testing in compliance with your procedures, correct?
yes,
And you're also aware that on occasions, when MRA is conducting an investigation, they may put holds on product while the investigation is ongoing.
yes.
And you're aware that that's why some of your product is on hold currently.
It seemed like all of it was. I know there were products on hold that the recall, as we understood it, didn't seem to cover it. So I was not clear what the holes covered and what they didn't.
But today, there are some holds, but those are attributed to MRAs conducting investigations unrelated to this microbial issue.
We aren't told why they're on hold. All we know is they're on hold. Nobody, so what the reason for the hold is, I mean, obviously some of it relates to this, but whether there are things on hold for other reasons, we would not know that.
And metric doesn't that indicate investigation and complaint number? I said it. Sure. In metric, doesn't it, can't you look and see that a complaint number has been assigned and it says investigation?
I don't know the answer to that question, possibly, but I've not seen that metric myself. Doesn't mean it might not be in there if you don't know where to look.
But is it your understanding that right now you can carry out microbial testing in accordance with your approved SOP?
Yes.
I believe that you testified that A2LA credited your temperature method, temperature keeping methods, or I'm slaughtering that, I know.
What they accredited our methods, and then we got this new platform and we had them come back and add that to what's called our scope of accreditation. So basically they came back in, and that was just September, and looked at all of the documents and methods and logs and all of that associated with that method, those two instruments and all their methods associated with them, and accredited us at that time.
Those, are those the machines from BioMaru?
Yes.
Are those the two machines from BioMaru?
Maybe you can lower the microphone, because I'm having a little trouble too.
Maybe I can stand on a platform.
Yes.
And in September of this year, did A2LA note a deficiency in your keeping of logs and records for the temperature for microbial testings?
For Bay City, they were missing temperature log, not time log, temperature log for, I think the last month. Lansing did not have that deficiency.
Is it true that in Bay City, those logs were missing from July till September 2021?
I don't know if it was that whole time, but I know they were missing them. And so what the response to that was, and this is kind of more like typically what happens with an audit, Bay City instituted keeping those logs. And then after like a couple weeks, they sent a copy of that to the inspector so he could see they were in compliance, and he considered the finding remediated.
Where were the logs?
I think they just they switched platforms and it just kind of fall under the wire there.
Were
So
logs kept?
during that time period for that laboratory? No, they were in Lansing, not in Bay City.
I mean, you knew that they needed to be kept. They just weren't for that 3-month period? Or-
I don't, yeah, that's correct. It was a temperature log also, not an incubation log, right? Not an incubation time log. It was a temperature log.
During the time period that you were working with the MRA, working on providing the items they requested on their checklist.
This is after the recall was issued.
Yeah. Oh, no, excuse, before and after. When was it then? You started, was it November 15th with the checklists?
So the recall, I think is the 17th, and I think the 18th was Wednesday, if I'm recalling the dates correct, and then Thursday was Thanksgiving. We started working on the list. Julie Kleitman sent us. Might have been the previous, and then we got the list that Claire had sent us, but we worked through the Thanksgiving weekend to get all of those for her.
Are you sure it wasn't before Thanksgiving?
It might have been the weekend
Okay,
before
I know where-
Thanksgiving.
I
Yeah,
know
I
where.
think it was the weekend before Thanksgiving, but it was through the weekend. Yeah.
Okay, and you were working on gathering information and data to provide to the MRA to become in compliance with your microbial testing methods.
It was everything on an audit finding. So they asked for a whole, she sent us a list of everything and said, you need to do these right now. And then later, there were more things that we needed to do right now. So we drafted responses to those. We sent documentation. We sent instrument data, all of that. So we got all of that to her as quickly as we could.
Okay. And during that time period, when you were working on that, providing that information to the MRA, you didn't test for microbes, correct?
No, we couldn't.
But you were able to test for pesticides and terpenes and things like that.
We could, but the problem is most of the samples are what they call full compliance samples, which means they need everything. And so if they can only get, 4 out of 5 tests or 6 out of 7 tests needed, they're not gonna, split the sample. They would have to send one sample to us and one sample to another lab to do the rest of it. And that's a lot on the growers because it's more product they're losing. So they're going to send the sample to a lab that can do everything. So basically, if we couldn't do microbials, we couldn't do the majority of our business.
Okay. And you understood that while you were providing this information that the MRA requested, you were voluntarily not testing while you corrected these deficiencies.
No, we would have wanted to test for them, but we were not able to because our customers were telling us we weren't, and anything we tested was being locked up in metric. And we were told in order to resume testing, as some of these emails say, which basically means you can't do it right now.
The back and forth that ended last Wednesday, the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, where the MRA said they're comfortable that you're in compliance with your testing procedure. Is that about a week?
A week from today,
Was it about a week-long period that you weren't testing for microbials?
about a week long, yeah. Well, I mean, if you figure today is the start of it, it's more like 10 days, I guess.
Yeah, but her point is that I think it is, so if I'm incorrect, let me know, is November 17th was the recall.
Yes,
And by the Wednesday, even if it was Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving, which was the 24th, that's basically a week where
Yes.
you knew you couldn't do this microbial testing, which, as you testified, affected the vast majority of your business. But after that 1 week, you knew the state was not going to prevent you from conducting all your testing.
well, we weren't sure, to be honest with you, because of all of the confusion.
But let me
surrounding
ask
this.
you this, when you
Yeah.
sat down for Thanksgiving dinner, you probably had a good feeling that this might be getting to an end.
I was hoping so.
I don't know what time you ate dinner on Thanksgiving, but
Well, it wasn't Wednesday night at 8, was it?
It was not.
So that's when she was informed,
Right.
so.
were you informed even more specifically Thanksgiving morning that yes, the MRA is comfortable that Viridis is now testing in compliance with this testing procedure? Yes, it may carry out as long as it's,
We did. I don't think it was Thursday morning, but it was before Monday.
I believe earlier in your direct examination, you said that, the administrative rules, they dictate or say how you have to run certain tests. Is that correct? Or correct me if I'm misstating your testimony.
The technical bulletins do.
It's true, isn't it, that the rules, the administrative rules mandate that licensees must follow the approved procedures?
Yes.
And I guess the inverse of that is if a licensee isn't following the approved procedures, they're out of compliance, correct?
That could be the case, yes.
Yes. Did Mr. Mashad submit an updated SOP, which included both time and temperature logs in November?
He did that in response to this audit because it was asked for.
Can we talk about the incubation a little bit?
Yes.
So it's my understanding that different samples incubate for different lengths of time and at different temperatures depending on what you're testing for.
That's correct.
Okay, and so could you give us an example of a microbe that incubates for 24 to 48 hours?
So Aspergillus is 24 to 48 hours. And for some of the other microbes, it depends on what temperature you're going to do it at. Aspergillus is 24 to 48 hours. Coliforms is 24 to 28 hours, I believe. And I would have to check. The other ones I think are also 24. Yeast and mold is 72.
And they incubate in a certain temperature range for a certain length of time, correct?
Correct.
And without having time in and time out logs, how would the MRA know whether, for example, a sample of Aspergillus in one of your labs was in there for 1 minute or 3 days?
Well, if it was in there for 1 minute, the controls wouldn't work because they have to incubate for a certain period of time. The practice in the lab was to do it at the same time every day. So we did know that it was being incubated for the proper time. It's also, it's a microbe and it grows. So if you were to incubate it for 23 minutes and 59 seconds, it's not like you're not going to see anything. You are going to see growth there. You also wouldn't see the controls. They wouldn't work if the assay was not incubated for a long enough period of time.
You said the practice at the lab or the labs is to incubate at the same time every day. I mean, how is that enforced?
Well, it was just it wasn't enforced per se. I mean, it's a workflow issue. They would do the same tasks at the same time every day. And so they knew what time they were putting them in and what time they were taking them out. Again, we had no objection to keeping the logs. We do that now. It was just not something that had been asked for previously. So we hadn't done it. But again, if the assay didn't work, the controls wouldn't work, and then we would not be able to report the data.
What, if the MRA believed there was a problem and they asked for verification that this, the test was done at this time of day or this length of
Right.
time, you weren't able to provide that kind of information to them other than saying, well, this is our routine.
That's correct.
And you don't have to see a problem with that?
Well, it's not there. First of all, I don't, because again, the assays worked and the controls work. And secondly, it wasn't a matter of hiding anything. It was a matter of not doing something that no one asked us to do. Incubation periods are common for all microbial assays. I mean, even the ones we did prior to this, when we did plating, when we did some of the other things, this was not written down anywhere, something we needed to do. So it just we hadn't done it, but we don't have any objection to doing it, and we do it now. The other thing is it's sort of a matter of looking at it backwards, like prove you didn't do something wrong when there really isn't any evidence that anything was wrong. So that's kind of a little bit of the issue that I have with this, but I don't have any objection to keeping the time logs, and we certainly do that now.
Recalls in general, what should the MRA do if it believes that there's a product that's could present risk to the public?
I guess the first thing they should do is evaluate the magnitude of that risk. And I don't know, I wouldn't know how necessarily you would do that, but I would assume there are people who would. And then go from there. Is it all products? Is it one product? Is it a big risk? Is it a little risk? I'm sure there are people like in the FDA who know how to do this kind of thing that could advise them. But if that was the case, if there was a significant risk or a risk to the general public, yeah, then you should go ahead and recall something.
Right. And smoking or ingesting microbials can really cause damage to a human being, correct?
It could.
Is this accurate that some fungi can produce toxic metabolites known as mycotoxins, which can infect immunocompromised humans and cause allergic. My eyes are so bad. Aflatoxin and pathogenic infections such as the disease Aspergillus.
Yes, there are some species of Aspergillus, not all of them, but some of them that can produce aflatoxins.
Do you know what aspergillosis is?
It's an inhalation disease of certain species of Aspergillus.
I mean, does a human contract a disease called aspergillosis?
Certain people can, if you're immunocompromised, that's possible.
And is that affect lung function?
Yes,
Can it kill somebody?
presumably. I'm not an expert in aspergillosis.
With aspergillus testing, is it accurate that you don't, you can't quantify the amount of aspergillus in a sample? It's when it's tested, it's either a detection or non-detection.
Well, that's the threshold MRA sets. We could probably quantify it, but their assay is qualitative, meaning it's yes or no. If they wanted a number of, Aspergillus colonies per forming units per gram, something like that, we would have to go back and probably reformat the assay, but it would be possible because we do that with other organisms. This is just the threshold that they have set.
But so the MRA says if any
Any
aspergillus
detections.
is detected, it's a failed.
Right.
Let me just restate that. So if aspergillus is detected, the MRA considers that a failed sample.
Yes.
Oh, a what? I didn't,
A failed sample.
okay.
Are there other microbials that do happen to have a certain amount before they're failed? There
Yes.
are?
Yeah, coliforms and total yeast and mold have quantitative limits. So above a certain number of colony forming units per gram, it fails. Below that, it passes.
But aspergillus is any presence, it's a failure.
Correct.
Do you recall on Thanksgiving, November 25th at 9:39 in the morning, receiving an email that the MRA is now comfortable that Viridis's testing is in conformance with its approved testing procedure and may carry out testing in conformance with that approved procedure?
At 9:35 on Thanksgiving morning, I was not looking at my email. So I do recall getting that, but I don't recall the exact time that it was sent out. I did see it over the course of that weekend, though.
Okay, and so at least on Thanksgiving last week, you were explicitly told, as long as you're in conformance with your testing procedures, you may carry it out.
There was an email sent to that, yes.
I ask one more question, you probably get sick of me asking questions. You did testify that when this testing was done, and things that were retested,
Yes,
none of that was from Bay City.
correct.
Okay,
Okay, do the redirect, is that okay with the board?
sure can, as long as you are to the point, because it's just redirect.
Absolutely, Ron. Dr. Glenn, I just want to clarify something that came up on cross exam. Were you ever notified from the MRA that you were not allowed to continue doing microbial testing?
Not specifically, no. Again, we heard it from our customers. We had our samples locked up in metric and we had emails like from Desmond Mitchell saying things like in order to resume testing. So I never got an official, you can't do this anymore email. It was sort of indirect.
Right. The 4 o'clock Teams call on Thursday, the 18th. Was there a discussion about if and when Veritas could resume microbial testing?
Yes, we did talk about that.
And what were the conditions that were explained during that Teams call?
Julie Kleitman said, she sent us a list, a bullet point list, and there were about 4 or 5 things on there. And she said, if you do these, you can resume testing, but there may be more things later. And we said, okay. And then after we hung up on that call, and I'm thinking it was 5 or close to 5, we got a second list from Claire Patterson, which had a lot more things on there that we had to do all those as well. So
And I think you testified that several people at Veritas worked all that Friday and submitted supplemental material to the MRA that Friday morning, right? Let's break it down. The Thursday night, people stayed up real late, worked long and hard to get that done and sent it in Friday morning. Is that correct?
yeah, it all kind of runs together now, but yes, because we did this on more than one occasion. We
Yeah,
did
and-
send a bunch of things on Friday, yes.
And this is one of the exhibits to your affidavit. So we're not going to get into detail, but
Right.
some of those emails show that the original list was Thursday night. And then we were given then Veritas was given a longer list after that meeting.
Right,
And you stayed up really late to finish it and submit it by Friday, right?
yes,
And they acknowledged receipt Friday morning.
yes.
And we asked them if they identified any deficiencies to let us know in real time so we could be working on parallel tracks, right?
We did ask that, yes.
Did they ever do that?
No, they said that would be confusing, or they wanted to make sure it was like all in one thing before they sent it to us.
So Veritas got a response after close of business on Friday with a new list of additional things, right?
Yes,
And then you testified that you worked all weekend to get that done, correct?
we did.
Okay, and that was submitted Sunday night, correct?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay, and then there was another list on Monday. They wanted more things, right?
There was another list on Monday, yeah.
And there's been a suggestion that,
This is the Monday before Thanksgiving.
correct. Right, Mrs.
Yeah,
Dr.
there
Long?
was, because one of the things was they wanted a lot of instrument data. And so that took a while to compile and we sent it to them, but then they had to send it out to somebody else to look at. So that is still in process. That's not even done yet, as far as I know.
And one of the things they wanted a thermometer in each incubator, is that right?
They did.
And Veritas explained to the MRA that that wasn't on the original list and it was going to take a few days to get those, correct?
Well, it also was, we already had 2 thermometers in the incubators and they wanted a specific kind of one because they wanted to know, what do you do if the incubator goes out? How would you know? And we told them in our response to the audit, they have alarms on them and the alarm goes off and it doesn't go off until you turn it off. So we would know when we came in the morning if it was out of tolerance. And they said, well, that's not enough. You need to buy these special thermometers that log the data continually. So we had to go out and get those over the weekend and install those.
And those special thermometers that were on the second or third iteration of the list, those aren't in your SOP, right?
Correct.
The SOP that's been validated and observed countless times and proficiency tests and approved by the MRA, right?
Well, our SOPs say we'll track the temperature, which we do, and we always have done, and there was actually not any suggestion we hadn't done it. Now they were saying you need a special kind of thermometer that's different than what you've had, even though the ones we have are NIST traceable, which is kind of the gold standard. So this was a new thing that they told us that no one had ever said we had to do before, but we went ahead and jumped through that hoop and got those done.
And it's been suggested that this was voluntary. Like, did you work all that Thursday night and all that Friday and all that weekend because you thought that you were providing these supplemental materials to the MRA just as a matter of goodwill and it was voluntary, or was it because the MRA was telling you could not do tests until you did this long list that kept getting longer?
Well, it was the latter, because again, typically in an audit, you never pass an audit. Nobody ever audits your lab and says you're perfect. They always give you something you got to fix. And typically you have a certain amount of time, 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is, to fix it. And then the auditor will say, okay, you fixed it, you're good. So that was not the case here. Basically, we had to do this or we couldn't do business. So that's why we had the urgency.
And that was your understanding based on the Teams conversation at 4 o'clock on the
Yes.
18th, right? Which was
Yes,
the first time that was communicated.
yes,
And in response to the follow-up lists that kept moving, every time you got a response, it wasn't, you're approved to test, but we'd like you to do X, Y, Z more. It was always, you can't keep testing until you keep doing all these more things that we're requesting, right?
That was correct.
And you mentioned that a typical audit, you have some time to respond, right? And just an example of that, did you have an audit by A2LA in the summer that had some question items and you worked through those and fixed that?
Yes, we did.
Okay, and the MRA knew that A2LA had a corrective action list, right?
Yes. they
And there
had-
wasn't a recall issue then?
No.
Was there any discussion about any recall at that point?
No,
Okay, so that was more of a, you've testified a couple times, like a typical audit where no lab is perfect and you might find some things that could be improved, but there's usually a process to, and a time period to implement those, correct?
yes,
Okay. I also want to ask you there, you were asked about how prevalent Aspergillus is. And there's a sentence in the brief, defendant's brief that says that the recall was justified because the Aspergillus was, quote, abnormally low. Is there a reason that Veritas's Aspergillus results might be lower than the average lab in Michigan?
well, that's an interesting question. I don't even know what abnormally low means. I know that with this new BioMirU platform we're using, it's higher than it was before. And I also know that our Aspergillus fails, the samples that failed, it's customer specific and almost regional specific. There are customers who do, for example, indoor, they have all their samples in greenhouses and they control the climate very precisely. They don't have issues with microbials. Others have outdoor grows and they have more issues. So most of the fails, they tend to cluster around certain clients. And that's kind of something that we would expect to see depending on how they grow their samples. So I don't know what is expected, what you're supposed to, are you supposed to fail 25% of everything or what? I don't know, but that's the pattern that we see. And I think that variability is explained by the practice of the clients, different clients have different growing procedures.
Veritas Lansing and Veritas North both fail a fair number of Aspergillus tests, right?
Yes,
Okay. And the kind of lead scientists at Veritas have over 75 years of experience in laboratory science, correct?
yes.
Okay. And would you ever manipulate a sample or do something to try to cover up Aspergillus or reduce the chances of catching Aspergillus in a test?
No, I mean, the data is what the data is. You report it out. If it fails, it fails.
And through the proficiency testing and all of the accreditation, you showed you as a company, as two separate licensees have showed and proven over and over again to independent accrediting agencies and the MRA that you can reliably do these tests, correct?
Yes,
And produce predictable results and get exactly what the proficiency test administrator is looking for, right?
that's correct.
Okay. I just want to ask you, there's been some suggestion that the what we've called, the effective suspension or the de facto shutdown was over before Thanksgiving. And you mentioned that there was some uncertainty and some back and forth trying to understand what exactly was happening, right?
Yes,
Okay. And you mentioned that even up through this week, right, there were some exchanges going back and forth and it wasn't clear what was happening, right?
that's correct.
For the record, Your Honor, I think this was in Exhibit C to our reply brief. And first question for you, Dr. Glenn, is just, do you recognize this email?
Yes,
Okay, and let's start at the bottom one. There's one from Ms. Hunt Scully, dated Friday, November 26th. Do you see that? It spills over onto the next page.
yes.
And could you just read the first 3 sentences, please?
On these emails? Is Dr. Glenn, I don't see her listed on these emails.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Glenn, were you on these emails contemporaneously?
Not contemporaneously, but these have been forwarded to me. So I know Greg Michaud has forwarded a lot of these to me as well. So I'm not in the initial recipients of these, but I did see them
Is it fair to
afterwards.
say that before the lawsuit was filed or sometimes before Thanksgiving, most of the communications were involving the Viridis executive team? And then at some point, the AG's office asked us to just have communications between attorneys?
I believe that's the case, yeah.
Okay, so you have seen a copy of this email?
I
correct?
have seen it, yes.
And was there discussion within Viridis about the meaning of this email and how it would direct your future conduct?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, again, the whole, putting the samples on hold in metric is kind of a problem. It's a problem for our customers. And if they were being told, which some of them were, that we couldn't test or things will be on hold, they just didn't want to have anything to do with us. They didn't want to get tied up like that. So we wanted clarification so we could relay that to them. And it was, there's a number of things in it. Can we test for microbials? Are you going to put our stuff on hold? What about the stuff that's already on hold? What do we do with that? So there were a lot of questions and the answers were very piecemeal and kind of confusing. So we were trying to get it and you were trying to get some clarification to a lot of these and we were kind of going back and
But
forth.
some of that sounds like it's relative to how do we remedy what has already occurred as opposed to what we're allowed to go do moving forward.
Some of it was, yes. And some of it was like, how do we get out of this hole we're in, as it were? So
Your Honor, on that point, I would contend that they were approved to do this test, and when they were told they couldn't, they weren't given notice.
Yeah, I just asked her a question.
Okay.
She answered it.
Okay, thank you. Can you read the first three sentences of Ms. Hunt Scully's email, please?
Kevin,
It's gonna be an exhibit.
Yes, Your Honor. Should I move it into evidence right now?
Well, is it, I don't have a marker on it. Is it number 5, I guess?
Number 5, yes.
Is there any objection to exhibit 5, which is the, I guess these are combined emails, right? A string of emails?
2 emails in a thread, yes, Your Honor.
Okay, exhibit 5 is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Glenn, could you please read the first 3 sentences of Ms. Hunt Scully's November 26th email?
it says, Kevin and David, we have reviewed your questions with the MRA. You expressed that your understanding is that once Viridis tests a sample, the sample will not be placed on hold in metric. The MRA indicated that this is true unless an issue arises through an ongoing or new investigation that warrants the need for MRA to place an administrative hold on a package.
That's the first 3.
Right.
Thank you. So this is the Friday after Thanksgiving. And this was the clarification guidance. However, did this clarify things for you in terms of what you were allowed to do and what you weren't allowed to do and what would happen after you resume testing?
This was helpful. Yes, that we could resume testing and upload things to metric and they would be released to so the customers could sell them.
Can you read the final sentence of the first paragraph of my response?
Of your
The
response.
Saturday afternoon starts with what?
The final sentence or the
Final
final,
sentence of the first paragraph of my response.
what does unless an issue arises through an ongoing or new investigation that warrants the need for MRA to place an administrative hold on a package mean?
Did they ever answer that question to the best of your knowledge?
To the best of my knowledge, no.
Okay, so there's been the suggestion that everything was fine before Thanksgiving, right? There was maybe a glimmer of hope that there was an ambiguous email that suggested maybe you could start retesting, but the elephant in the room, the big question was, okay, what's going to happen next? Because if we reach out to customers and gain their trust again, and then the MRA puts it back under hold again, then that's going to be further irreparable harm, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so would it be fair to say that as you're sitting here today, you are relatively confident that the MRA won't put holds on microbial tests unless there's some new issue that concerns them?
I would say yes for microbial tests.
Okay, and how long have you had that relative comfort? This email was from Monday, right?
From Monday.
Okay, so from Monday to now,
Yes.
but as you mentioned, some of the tests that you've been approved to restart haven't even finished their incubation period and testing time, right?
Right. So if we haven't even gotten them all in, right? So we sent people out on Monday. I was out of the office Monday and Tuesday, but my understanding is we sent people out to collect samples on Monday, which means the testing period would start on Tuesday, which means we wouldn't even have results before Friday morning. So we wouldn't have been able to upload anything to Metric unless it was a non-microbial test.
So you don't even know yet what's gonna happen when you start trying to put these and upload them to Metric, right?
Correct.
But Dr. Glenn, I mean, with all due respect, when you started your business, you knew you had to deal with an administrative agency, right?
Yes.
You don't know what an administrative agency is going to do tomorrow or a month from today. I don't. How could you?
No, but I do know because I was with the state police and we had a lot of rules we had to follow, that there should be a process we could go to or rules.
Yeah, but that wasn't the question. The question is, you don't know, like nobody knows, when a state agency, including the state police, will take action based on whatever circumstances are in front of them. Sometimes, obviously, we don't get into we don't have to get into the legal stuff about procedures that are necessary and all that, but any business, you don't know what the IRS is going to do. You don't know. I mean, this is part of life, let alone part of business, right? I mean, you don't know what the future holds. This is a risk no matter what.
There is, but we also do have some expectation that they would play fair, I guess. So I hope that everything will upload to Metric fine, and I
understand, but
Yeah.
you do understand too that because listen, your testimony has been fantastic and it's
Thank you.
been very helpful. And I'm not saying that you're done, but well, I know I lost my train of thought, so forget it. If I think of it, I'll bring it up.
Let me see if I can address the court's comments this way. Before November,
You don't need.
or I'll go in a
I should
different
keep my
direction.
mouth quiet. Look, we're beating a dead horse now.
No.
I get what's going on.
Okay.
I understand the facts. And I have more questions for defendants than I do for your side.
Okay, I'll keep it very brief, Your
All
Honor.
right.
Before November 18th, were you losing sleep, worrying about if the MRA would follow their rules?
yes,
Yes, you were.
I was.
Did that get worse after the 18th when?
Yes, it did.
Okay. You mentioned a few times that if you didn't incubate long enough these samples, the controls wouldn't work. Can you please explain what is a control and how are you confident that the controls would not work if you were not following your SOP?
So every test, no matter what it is, you have to have controls. Typically, you'll have a positive control, which should be positive for whatever you're looking for, and a negative control that should be negative for whatever you're looking for. And how you, so in the case of Aspergillus, I guess, since it's what we're talking about, we have samples that have been inoculated or treated with Aspergillus, so they'll grow, so they'll be positive, and samples that are just blank, buffer that won't, should be negative. So those samples get treated along with all of the regular samples. They undergo the same process, and the positive control should be positive, negative should be negative. And if they don't, you have to repeat the assay because your controls didn't work. And so you don't know that something didn't go wrong and you have to start all over. The controls would not have worked if the incubation period was not sufficient.
You say that you'd have to do the assay over again. So every time you put something in the incubator, there's some in there that are controls to just make sure that the test is running the way it should be?
Yes,
Okay, every single time.
yes,
And that's part of the daily or weekly QC process?
daily. No matter what the assay is, no matter whatever test it is, pesticides, metals, whatever it is, you always have controls.
You said 1 or 2 people look at those on a daily basis?
Yes, so so again, in the case of microbials, the person who did the assay is going to, review the data, and then they're going to send it off to a folder, and then myself or our lab supervisor is going to look at it again to make sure they agree with it. And then if it looks good, then they will upload it to the database. In Bay City, it's Bay City people, not me, but it's the same procedure.
So besides the years and years of experience and the approved SOP and validated and proficiency tests and the scientists that swear that it was in there the appropriate amount of time and the controls, aren't there also video requirements in all labs?
There are, yes.
So there are video cameras on the lab 24/7, right?
Yes, 24/7, yes.
And did that come up in the pre-recall conversations where Viridis was pleading with the MRA to check video evidence to corroborate the statements and representations of all the scientists that you were confident it was in there the appropriate amount of time?
Just a second.
Also, not so much. Really outside the.
I agree. And in addition, she already testified about producing videos and how long it took. So I already knew that there were videos there.
Your Honor, I may have missed that part when I was digging through
Yeah.
exhibits. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
To your knowledge, was there any record of any health issues affiliated with any tests coming out of Viridis during the August 10th to November 16th period?
I have not heard of any health issues.
That's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Glenn, you are all done. Thank you very much
Thank
for your
you.
testimony. And appreciate your time and your explanation of things.
Thank you.
Yep. Have a good evening. Okay, any other witnesses from plaintiffs?
Your Honor.
Okay. Defendants, do you have any witnesses that you want to call in the next 13 or 14 minutes?
Your Honor, we would like to call one of the MRA scientists. I can ask.
A scientist? And what's she going to testify about?
The testing, why the MRA found that. Really explain to the court how.
Let me ask a question to the lawyers. What is the recall has occurred, right? I mean, the products, we know the time period. We know that the clients have already been contacted. I'm not sure what impact an injunction, which is supposed to preserve the status quo, can even do at this point if I were going to do something.
The mischaracterization in the brief, in the defendant's brief, suggesting that the recall is over, or that there isn't having ongoing effect today. There are still customers that are struggling with this and trying to retest and test, trace things back to samples. Again, as the Viridis North, that there's no.
Well, I know, but I can't control what these third parties are doing. I mean, what can I do? Say that it's over? I mean, what if you ask me what the real remedy is that the state issues something that says we're satisfied and we approve of Viridis doing this testing, because their recall notice says an investigation is still ongoing. All marijuana products are being recalled and blah, 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 all in written form that was for the public view. And now what we have, as far as I know, is emails telling them it's A-OK now. Because, I mean, maybe I'm getting more upset than I should be, but has the state done some kind of public notice that the recall, or not the recall, but that the state agency has given approval for all testing and all that related to this microbial?
restricted or suspended.
I'm not saying it was.
Right.
But what I'm saying is, I mean, the evidence and common sense tells you that when the state agency in charge of this issues a recall like that, customers are gonna say, what's going on? And if the state then tells them on Thanksgiving morning, credit to the state for working Thanksgiving morning, that it's a-okay, why don't they broadcast it just like I mean, it's just like the newspapers. You know, Chris Murray commits a felony is on the front page, and then when they find out Chris Murray hasn't committed the felony, it's on the third page. This is what I'm getting at. The remedy for these people is to tell the public the same thing you told them before. It's okay now, and maybe they'll get their businesses back. It's not a judge saying interfering with an agency's already decided recall. That's what my frustration is that this is not, and this is not a ruling. I'm not going to make a ruling until we're all done. But this is my concern, and my concern is more of a practicality as to what the state should be doing to tell the truth now. And so I don't know if you can talk to anybody at the agency. Maybe they won't care what I have to say, but I mean, orally, hopefully they will in writing. That's my, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not what they're really looking for. But as far as I can tell, that would be the best remedy that these people could have, is that they have the, I guess, or their customers have the information that this is a-okay. But anyway, if you still want to bring a witness, here's the problem, which I told the lawyers earlier. I'm talking too fast. I have a pre-existing 4 o'clock obligation with my law school, and I have to do it. Now, it could be done by 5:30. I don't know. Is this witness, I assume, is here? Okay. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know what everybody's schedules are, so I'm not gonna. If we took a break and started up at, well, what would your preference be? Just coming back at 5:30 and finishing it, or would coming back in the morning be better? Well, I appreciate that, but I'm more worried about, people's schedules and lives. And what about you? What about everybody else? I mean, I'll do whatever is the easiest. My actual day tomorrow is pretty clear, although we wouldn't be doing it all day. We'd do it for probably an hour or two in the morning. So
I think we would prefer today, Your Honor, if we could go.
in that's fine. That's fine. I'll just say I have to run upstairs by no later. I mean, like that 10 of, cause I gotta, get on Zoom, get ready to do this panel thing. So yeah, if you can do it in 10 minutes and come back, that'd be great. Okay, thanks.
We talk afterwards?
I just. Okay, good, good. I'm freaking out. We are too. Well, it's about Beardus, but it's also about his.
And she deals with this stuff all the time. So, flows right out. I noticed though that when the AG was asking questions up there, the feedback that was happening, I heard some feedback with her. And I couldn't figure out why.
Judge Murray,
Yeah.
if you have a second, I just wanted to confirm what the plan is going forward for the hearing tonight.
Okay, well, you gotta run,
No, I just, because we couldn't hear what some of the parties were saying because they weren't into their mic, so we don't know what was agreed upon.
well, we haven't agreed upon anything yet.
Okay.
But Morgan, if we stayed till like, if we went from like 5:30 to 6:30 or something like that, would you be able to do that?
I believe so.
Well, but let me know the truth, because if it's a problem, I don't wanna cause any inconvenience.
On my end of things, I'm fine. I just have to check in with everybody.
All right, well, we don't know yet, so don't check. But we're gonna know soon, because I gotta go upstairs in a few minutes. We do not have to go on the record for this. What's the scoop? What do we want to do? Well, it's an option. Uh, Okay, well, let me ask this question. Are you, I don't know where everybody's from. Lansing, I said. Anyway, yeah, I kind of knew you're not in that palatial palace that Millenbach has out in Southfield. Anyway, well, look, that's fine. You know, if that's best for all of you. Is it gonna be one witness? Okay. All right, how is clock too early for you guys to get down here, or is that, and tell me the truth, if it's a pain,
Starting at 10 makes a big difference.
Does it?
traffic-wise.
so the Court of Appeals is right on our 10 o'clock case call at
I
times.
I have to leave my house by like 6 to get there by 9.
Where do you live?
It's awful.
3 hours?
On some days more than that.
Boy, so when I drive up, well, it doesn't matter. And maybe we drive different speeds. All right, well, I guess we'll do that at 10 o'clock sharp. Because I want to get this over by an hour or two at the most. And then I can work on my opinion.
Just so that there's no lack of notice or whatever, we'd like to just be clear right now that we intend to call some available witnesses to clarify that this is having ongoing, there's $230 million of the product in the pipeline right now. So it's not that the recall's over. I think that's a huge misconception, and there's ongoing damage going every single day, and we would like to put on some testimony to accentuate that and make that clear that there are serious consequences if the court does not invalidate the ultra-various recall.
Okay. You can do that. Then we'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow. All right, thanks. Have a good night. Drive safe.